U.S. National Security Adviser Jake Sullivan arrived in Israel today.
Prime Minister, good to see you. Good to see you.
His visit follows U.S. President Joe Biden's warning this week that Israel is losing international support. Sullivan met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and members of his war cabinet. The White House national security spokesperson confirmed Sullivan delivered a message.
He did talk about possible transitioning from what we would call high-intensity operations, which is what we're seeing them do now, to lower-intensity operations sometime, in the near future. But I don't want to put a timestamp on it.
But Israel's defense minister had his own message to deliver.
It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months. But we will win and we will destroy them.
Here to walk us through all of this is Aaron David Miller. He is a senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and previously served as a U.S. State Department official working on Middle East policy and the Arab-Israel peace process. Aaron David Miller, it's good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
We're seeing reports from the New York Times and other places that the White House has told the Israeli government it wants this large-scale ground operation to stop around the end of this year and transition to a more targeted phase in this war. What do you make of this message and this development?
Well, I think that the upshot of Jake Sullivan's trip is an effort to convey the president's comments the day before, in which he delivered pretty sharp messages to the prime minister about conflicting war aims, indiscriminate bombing, and the like. Although even that set of campaign remarks was embedded in a very long, what I would describe to you as a love letter to Israel. Mm. I think, by and large, the frame that the president created on October 10th, in which he sent a pretty unmistakable signal that he was willing to give the Israelis the time, the space, and the support to do what they think they needed to do against Hamas, I think that frame's evolved. But the basic frame, I think, is the same. The problem, I think, are diverging tactics. The administration's clock is ticking much faster, driven by political pressures at home and by opposition to the Israeli campaign in the region and in the international community. The Israeli clock, the IDF's clock, Israeli Defense Forces clock, is ticking much slower. Mm. And I think the administration compromise, we'll see whether the Israelis buy it or not, is to accept the fact that Israeli military activities will continue in Gaza for a very long time. The question is whether the Israelis are prepared to change their operational tempo and scale down the large-scale ground campaign, both in the north and now, especially in the south of Gaza. I think that's the key. It's kind of a blinking yellow light. I'm not sure either Netanyahu or the president has a stake in that light turning red, because that would suggest that the administration might be faced or forced to impose some sort of cost or consequence on the Israelis if they chose to ignore his let's call it his advice.
Well, how do you think Israel will react to this? Because I know the United Nations, there was a vote there to demand a ceasefire. And I know Israel has rejected that and not really willing to take its lead from the UN. It's really the U.S. that carries weight with that government. How do you think they will respond to this when they've been so emphatic that they have no intentions to stop their operations until they achieve their goal of eradicating Hamas's military capabilities in there?
Well, we voted twice in the Security Council to block those resolutions.
Right.
So it's not a question of the Israelis have no faith, credibility, or trust in the UN. Obviously, they have a stake in not alienating their key ally. As I mentioned, I think that the Israelis will try to some degree to accommodate the president's request. I think it may well be that they were considering scaling down at least the most intensive phase of their ground campaign. President said by January. I mean, that could easily slide to the end of January. So I think by and large, and I felt this from the beginning, whatever suspicions each side has of one another, I think that neither side has a stake in a major breach right now. It would not serve U.S. interests, and it would certainly not serve the interest of Mr. Netanyahu. Some argue that Mr. Netanyahu is laying the groundwork for a campaign, a re-election campaign, and that he's going to run on a platform of resisting American pressure. It may well be that the events of October 7th have created sufficient anger and even fear among the Israeli public that some would be receptive to that message. But running against the United States for an Israeli prime minister has never proven to be an effective strategy.
But, if Israel continues to prosecute the war at this level of intensity, or if even if they do tweak their methods, but civilian casualties continue to grow at these numbers, and we saw a report from CNN that 1 in 2 bombs are dumb bombs, like not guided missiles, sort of old-fashioned ammunition that just gets dropped and puts civilians at serious risk. How could that affect Biden's approach to this issue and what he says and what he does in terms of backing Israel?
Well, again, I think you'd have to see a flagrant effort on the part of the Israelis to essentially say to the president, thank you very much, but we're going to proceed as we need to believe we need to proceed. I don't think that this Israeli government, particularly now that it's been broadened to include both a former defense minister and a former chief of staff, to bring some additional professional military expertise into it. I don't think this government wants to or has a stake, frankly, in going to war with the United States. So I think there will be an effort on the part of the Israelis to accommodate. Whether or not that'll be sufficient for the Biden administration is hard to say. But I will say, having worked for Republican and Democratic administrations, no American president wants to get into an open fight or breach with an Israeli prime minister. It's awkward, it's messy, it's distracting. It could be potentially politically costly, and usually it's counterproductive. Look, the administration has backed Israel's war aims from the get-go, which involved the destruction of Hamas's military capacity above and below ground, the killing of its senior leaders responsible for the October 7 terror surge,
Right,
and the redemption of the hostages. I don't think Mr. Biden's support for those aims has changed at all. If you read the campaign statement, which prompted the comment on the indiscriminate bombing, I might add, and John Kirby appeared to walk that back today, wouldn't use the term indiscriminate.
right.
I think you see that the issue that separates the two are the tactics. And when it comes to tactics, we're talking about time. And time can be adjusted with some flexibility. So again, I'm not predicting a major breach. Should there be one, the administration could slow walk munitions deliveries. It could decide to abstain or vote for a Security Council resolution. But I don't think we'll get there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The end point for both is the same. It's the path to that end point where there appears to be some friction. And your point is well made that Israel doesn't give a lot of credibility or take direction from the United Nations. But I wonder how other countries in the region might interpret that. Like, increasingly, there are fewer people sort of backing Israel and the approach it's taking, or fewer countries. We saw a lot of G7 countries. Half the G7 voted against, the rest abstained, other than America, Five Eyes, NATO. There is a shift in opinion here. This hasn't widened into a regional conflict, but I wonder how you think the key players in the region might view what's happening globally in terms of how they respond to Israel.
Well, you're not going to get as much cooperation as you might if the Israelis were more accommodating with respect to their war tactics. But that also pertains to the day after. And I think there will be very little effort or investment on the part of key Arab states, Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, Jordanians, to deal with the post-conflict situation in Gaza unless the administration leading this effort tethers Gaza to a broader pursuit of Israeli-Palestinian peace. Gaza first, humanitarian reconstruction, governance in Gaza, security. Once Hamas's sovereignty is ended there, it's not going to be possible without tethering it to a political horizon and a commitment on the part, certainly on the part of the United States. I doubt if you'll get the government of Israel to commit itself to two states based on meeting the mutual needs and requirements of Palestinians and Israelis. So I think the regional support and the anger is white hot on these regimes, particularly the ones that share contiguous borders with Israel. Jordan in particular has witnessed massive demonstrations. The authoritarians in the Gulf, the Emiratis and the Saudis, don't have a public relations problem in the sense that they govern with an iron fist. But others in the region, particularly Jordan, with its majority Palestinian population, has a serious political problem as a consequence of what's happened over there. We're now in the third month of this war, by the way, over the last several months. So I think the Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Saudis, Bahrain, Morocco, really do have a stake, not just in tamping down this conflict and stopping the exponential rise in Palestinian deaths and the human catastrophe in Gaza, but in trying to align themselves with an American policy that will pursue a post-Gaza conflict humanitarian and reconstruction policy, but tethered to a broader effort to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Aaron David Miller, we always appreciate your time. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.